watched a character and felt your own nervous system arguing with your own mind? One part of you says, this man is dangerous. Another part says, but maybe he's just real. Maybe he's harsh because the world is harsh. Maybe he's bullying because he's testing you. Maybe he's cruel because he's trying to make you strong. And the most confusing part is this: you keep waiting for the story to morally resolve him. You keep waiting for the moment where the mask falls and underneath it, there's a wounded hero. That is exactly the trap that Alonzo Harris sets, not just for Jake Hoyt, but for you. Because Alonzo is not the kind of villain who announces himself. He is the kind who enters your mind wearing the clothes of a mentor. He enters with confidence, with humor, with swagger, with a badge, with the language of experience. He sounds like every man who ever said, "Kid, you don't understand the real world yet." And if you've ever been in a street, a hostel, a classroom, a police station, or even a workplace, you have met that tone. You have met that smile that doesn't feel like warmth. You have met that laughter that makes you uneasy because it is laughing at something human. And you have met that strange type of powerful person who makes you uncomfortable, but still makes you wonder, is there something valuable here that I need? That is why this character doesn't just entertain you. He tests you. Alonzo is a psychological experiment wearing a leather jacket and a gun. And the question is not simply, is he good or bad? The question is, why did you want him to be good? What part of you kept hoping that under the brutality was a hidden decency? What part of you kept searching for the emotional proof that he still had a heart? Maybe it was because it's Denzel Washington. Maybe your brain already trusts the face, the voice, the charisma. Psychology has a word for this kind of thing. It's called the halo effect. When we perceive one strong positive trait in a person, like charm, confidence, intelligence, authority, we subconsciously assume they must have other positive traits too. We assume they are fair. We assume they are good inside. We assume they must have a moral reason behind their methods. That's why Alonzo feels like he could be a good man forced into bad decisions. Because he's not dumb. He's not sloppy. He's not insecure in the obvious way. He is socially intelligent. He reads rooms fast. He speaks like a man who has survived battles you haven't even seen. And to the human brain, survival often looks like wisdom. But let's slow down and look at the main psychological illusion he creates. Alonzo behaves like a man who is above the system. He speaks as if he has outgrown childish morality. He speaks as if being ethical is something you do only when you're naive. He frames rules as obstacles. He frames conscience as weakness. And he frames himself as the only one courageous enough to do what needs to be done. That mentality has another psychological name: moral licensing. It means a person believes their good mission gives them permission to do bad things. They feel morally authorized. They feel spiritually approved. They feel entitled to cross lines because they believe the enemy is worse. And here is the terrifying part. People with moral licensing do not feel like villains. They feel like saints with dirty hands. And Alonzo is brilliant at selling that identity. He uses phrases, tone, and energy that feel like a father training a son. I'm making you stronger. I'm showing you the real world. I'm giving you knowledge you can't learn in books. That's why even when he bullies Jake, it can feel like tough love. And you said something very important. There are moments where it genuinely feels like he cares. For example, those brief pauses in his cruelty. Those micro moments where he looks at Jake like he sees potential. The way he reacts when Jake says something meaningful, something emotional. That moment feels like, good. You have something inside you. Almost like he wants Jake to become a man that can survive. Almost like he is shaping a successor. But here is the psychological truth, and I want you to really absorb this. A predator can still feel affection. A manipulator can still enjoy your company. A corrupt mentor can still admire your innocence. That does not make them safe. That makes them more dangerous. Because the most dangerous people are not the ones who hate you. The most dangerous people are the ones who like you, but still use you. Alonzo is a master of what psychologists call intermittent reinforcement. This is the same mechanism that makes gambling addictive. You do not win every time, so you keep chasing the win. With Alonzo, you don't get kindness every moment. You get it in small, surprising doses. A compliment here. A laugh there. A "I see you" moment. And because it is not constant, it becomes more valuable. So you keep wanting to earn it. And that is how he controls Jake. Jake is not just being trained. Jake is being conditioned. Now let's talk about the biggest emotional confusion you described. The scene where Alonzo speaks about children. He says something like, "He was selling drugs to kids." That line hits you. Because it is not just anger. It feels like emotion. It feels like the truth. It feels like pain. And your mind says, okay, so there is a good reason. But again, psychology steps in. Alonzo is doing something called justification through a higher victim. The moment he mentions children, the moral conversation changes. Suddenly, the cruelty feels like protection. Suddenly, the violence feels like sacrifice. Suddenly, the brutality feels like responsibility. But the movie quietly shows you something else. It shows you that Alonzo does not simply punish evil. He uses evil. He negotiates with it. He profits from it. He feeds it. He doesn't remove corruption. He becomes its manager. And this is where the character becomes a documentary about power. Power is not only about strength. Power is about permission. Permission to violate. Permission to take. Permission to dominate. Permission to decide who deserves mercy and who deserves pain. A lot of bullies in real life are not bullies because they are strong. They are bullies because they are afraid of being nothing. The bully identity protects them from inner emptiness. And in Alonzo's case, the badge becomes his crown. Now let's address the part of him you found deeply predatory and sexual. The way he carries himself. The way he speaks. The way he surrounds himself with temptation. The way intimacy in his life feels less like love and more like control. There is a psychological pattern here, hypermasculine performance. Some men do not experience masculinity as calm confidence. They experience masculinity as a constant performance that must be proven every hour. They prove it through dominance, through humiliation of others, through sexual control, through intimidation, through conquest. But why? Because underneath that performance is often a fear of being powerless, a fear of being ordinary, a fear of being exposed as weak. So they build a persona so loud that nobody can hear their insecurity. Alonzo's charisma is not softness. It is armor. And his humor is not friendliness. It is a weapon. He laughs to control the air in the room. He jokes to establish dominance. He smiles to make you unsure of your own instincts. That is what makes him feel like the street bully you recognized. The person who forces you to laugh so you don't become the target. The person whose approval feels like safety even though it is poison. Now here is the most terrifying question the film quietly asks. What if Alonzo is not an exception? What if he is the natural outcome of the environment? In other words, what if Jake's training day is not just one day? What if it is a preview of his future? Because Alonzo keeps saying, "I was you." And even if he is lying, the statement carries a symbolic truth. The system can convert idealists into predators. Not always, but often enough to become a warning story. This is exactly how institutional corruption works. It does not always recruit bad people. Sometimes it recruits good people, then exhausts them, then humiliates them, then tempts them, then rewards them for crossing one small line. And once you cross one small line, the next line becomes easier, and the next one becomes normal, until one day you look around and realize you have become the thing you once feared. That is why Alonzo feels so real, because he is not just an individual. He is a system wearing a face. The movie gives you moments where you almost want to defend him. He's getting things done. He's cleaning the streets. He's removing monsters. The law is too slow. The courts are too weak. The criminals are too ruthless. This is the mindset that creates dictators in small forms. Not always political dictators. Street dictators. Institutional dictators. Workplace dictators. Family dictators. Men who believe they are the necessary evil. And the most manipulative phrase such men use is, "You need me." Alonzo does not simply want respect. He wants dependence. That is why he traps Jake. He doesn't just want Jake trained. He wants Jake owned. And the bathtub scene, when Jake is trapped and almost killed, that is the moment the film stops flirting with confusion. That is the moment the film shows you the bottom line. Alonzo will sacrifice anyone for his survival. And what saves Jake? Not violence, not cleverness, not corruption. What saves Jake is something almost spiritual. A genuine good deed that returns as mercy. He helped someone earlier, and that small human act becomes his protection later. That is the film's quiet moral message. Not a big speech, not a perfect resolution, just a brutal reality. Goodness is fragile, but it echoes. Alonzo, on the other hand, has no echoes. Only debts, only fear, only transactions, only enemies waiting for their payment. And that leads to the final heartbreak you described. You kept waiting for him to be morally resolved. You kept waiting for the story to reveal that deep inside he is a good man, that the corruption was a strategy, that the cruelty was medicine, that the darkness was temporary. But the film refuses to give you that comfort, because real life often refuses to. Some people do not get redeemed. Some people do not learn. Some people do not return to goodness. They simply continue until consequence arrives. And consequence in this story does not arrive like poetry. It arrives like reality, fast, ugly, unromantic. Alonzo's final moments feel like the collapse of an empire. He talks. He threatens. He performs. He tries to use words to bend the universe, because that's how he has always survived. He has survived with presence, with dominance, with belief. But there is a moment when the universe stops negotiating. The moment when charisma becomes useless. The moment when the street no longer respects the badge. The moment when the debts are collected. And the ending leaves you with that exact feeling you described. Annoyance, incompleteness, emotional frustration. You wanted closure. You wanted justice to look clean. You wanted the story to feel balanced. But instead, the film gives you something closer to the real world. A story that ends not with moral perfection, but with moral cost. Because sometimes the lesson is not, the bad man becomes good. Sometimes the lesson is, the bad man was always bad, he just knew how to look useful. And sometimes the lesson is, a man can do one emotional thing and still be dangerous. That's why Alonzo is unforgettable. Because he is the character who forces you to admit, you cannot always detect evil by the obvious signs. Sometimes evil wears a smile. Sometimes it tells jokes. Sometimes it mentors you. Sometimes it even protects you. Until one day it needs you as payment. And if you're listening to this and thinking of someone you've met, someone who made you uneasy, someone who was hard to please, someone who seemed like a bully but also seemed strangely competent, someone who had moments of warmth but a constant shadow behind their eyes, then you understand why this film stays in the mind. Because Alonzo is not just a movie character. He is a warning pattern. A warning about power without accountability. A warning about charisma without conscience. A warning about mentorship that is actually ownership. So was Alonzo good or bad? The most honest answer is this. He was a man who learned how to speak like a protector, while living like a predator. And the reason the movie feels unresolved is because your heart wanted him to be saved. Your heart wanted the world to make sense. Your heart wanted the bully to secretly be a guardian. But the film ends the way some stories end in life. Not with the ending you want, but with the ending that teaches you what reality is capable of. A man can be intelligent. A man can be charming. A man can even sound like he cares about children, and still destroy the people around him. That is the tragedy. That is the lesson. And that is why the credits roll. And you're still sitting there thinking, wait, that's it? Because your mind is still searching for the moral balance that never came. If you enjoyed this psychological deep dive, consider liking and subscribing. Because there are more characters like this waiting in cinema, and more lessons hiding behind their smiles.